Mass hysteria. In sociology and psychology, mass hysteria is a phenomena that transmits collective illusions of threats, whether real or imaginary, through a population and society as a result of rumors and fear. And as I discuss in many of my videos, it is much more common than people like to realize or admit. Welcome everyone, my name is Florio and welcome to another episode of Paranormal History. In this show, what I do is pick a paranormal topic from history and we sort of dissect it. We do like a deep dive on it and sort of analyze it and figure out what was true and not true. As a reminder to anyone who's new to the channel, I do have the Google form below as well if you want to submit any topic ideas or any personal stories as well. And feel free to comment as we move along through this video. So in today's episode, we're going to be discussing the Satanic Panic, but more specifically, the grifters that took advantage of it to line their own pockets. And yes, those grifters include the people that I talk about on this channel a lot, such as the Warrens and even Sylvia Browne. So come join me as I delve into the dark world of paranormal grifters who profited from the climate of hysteria and misinformation of the 1980s and 90s. What was the Satanic Panic? The Satanic Panic was essentially a mass hysteria event which by the end consisted of over 12,000 unsubstantiated cases of SRA, which means Satanic Ritual. The panic actually originated from a book written right here in Canada in 1980, but the actual mass hysteria originally took off in the US first and eventually traversed the majority of the world throughout the 80s and into the 90s. It officially lasted until, around mid-90s, early 90s, mid-90s, but there are still people holding on to the ideals of the Satanic Panic, and some people believe that it never was a hoax. Eventually, it did morph into the QAnon movement in 2017. The Satanic Panic exploded onto the scene through accusations of daycare centers performing satanic rituals, also rock music causing people to unalive folks, and Dungeons and Dragons even being a gateway to devil worship. The social, political, and psychological factors that contributed to the panic are complex and multifaceted. On the one hand, you had the growing power of the religious right, which saw Satanism as a real threat to American values. But on the other hand, you had the increasing anxiety about child safety, which made parents and authorities more susceptible to fantastical stories of satanic rituals. The majority of the testimonies during any of the Satanic Panic incidents and cases were obtained through suggestive questioning, which is the issue with the Satanic Panic. I'll explain more about what that is after the history section here, but short answer is they bully the person until they get the answer they want. It's like intensive continual questioning until the subject says what the interviewer finally wants them to say, which is not conducive of finding the truth. And during the questioning, the interviewer employs negative and positive reinforcement until the subject complies to the goal of the interviewer. There was also other types of testimony obtained as well that wasn't through the suggestive questioning. Adults came forward calling themselves breeders and reporting rituals and cults that they were part of these satanic cults.
Screaming for him now in the middle of the night. I dream that he's lost and I'm trying to find him.
Sickening. So incredibly unbelievable. But Zena LaVey, are these women lying?
That everything you've put forth as being considered satanic is not considered satanic by my standard or my definition of Satanism.
Lying.
Well, have the bodies been found? Where are they?
Cheryl Horton, who joins us via satellite. Zena LaVey, a Satanist who A, points out that this is not in keeping with her teaching, but B says, where is the proof? Where is the proof? Why is there no proof if what you're saying is true?
Hi, Geraldo. There's no proof for a fact of one thing. They burned them up and dumped them in the ocean.
Sound like they can't be happening. Ted Gunderson.
I absolutely believe it, without any doubt, based on the information that's been given to me across the country by numerous survivors and by confidential sources and informants.
Then why don't you name these people and arrest them? Never a name, never an arrest. These women come out of a group and they insist that they know the people in the group, and yet they do not identify these large mysterious cults. Name them and arrest them and get them off the street.
Does he not make a valid point?
He makes a valid point.
Michael Aquino is right when he says there have not been any successful prosecutions for this horrible allegation. Ted Gunderson is a sincere man with a good reputation who says that there are difficulties in the prosecution. Still, the point is it has never been proven in a court of law, but if these things are happening, then there should be a national task force. Because this is just unacceptable, this impasse. Coming up, we're going to have warning signs you should watch for, parents.
But it would seem people were after their 5 minutes of fame, but some of us said also that a good chunk of these people may have had some type of personality disorders or dealing with some sort of mental health crises as well. And the hysteria in the media feeding into their delusions just made everything so much worse. Some also had been hypnotized and memories implanted into them, which is sort of what started the whole thing, which we'll get into. But worst of all, some of these people knowingly took advantage of the panic and attention to make money, and those are the people that we're going to be talking about today. But first, let's take a look at the timeline of events. What sparked it all? How did it all get so out of hand so quickly? Let's get into it. Timeline. Quick note, I am just touching on these cases. I'm going to try and not go too much detail with them, with too many theories as well. So I don't want this whole video to carry on for too many hours, but I suggest if you want to learn more about each case, there are plenty of documentaries out there on YouTube that you can definitely go check out for each case. It all began in 1980. It started with the book Michelle Remembers, which Michelle Remembers is actually a discredited 1980 book co-written by Canadian psychiatrist Lorne Pasder and his psychiatric patient and eventual wife, Michelle Smith. So, I mean, there's already a problem here. He married his patient, but essentially what he did with Michelle is she went to him after she had some nightmares after a miscarriage. And she went to him for therapy. He then hypnotized her. And while she was under hypnosis, essentially pulled out these memories of her being in a cult, which she never was when she was a kid. Whether he implanted them or whether she decided to bring them up, everyone says he implanted them. There's a chance that she did it too. Either way, they're both scummy. They ended up writing this book together. They went on tours together. They got paid for essentially lying about everything. And just all in all, like, they knew what they were doing. At least the psychiatrist had to know what he was doing. I don't know, but they're the ones who kicked everything off. Like, this book is what kicked everything off.
Michelle Smith, a one-time victim by a satanic cult, and Dr. Lawrence Pasder, the psychiatrist who helped her come to terms with that nightmare.
The book is called Michelle Remembers.
Michelle Remembers.
We wrote it together.
It's the first publicized account of such rituals.
They would put me in pager.
For things that you experienced.
That's right.
Who are these people?
Well, they're a secret organization, a secret society.
When that book came out, I mean, all hell broke loose.
It was a theory that there's a satanic conspiracy.
There's a Satanic Panic from the 1980s and 90s.
The book got released, and then the media sort of got involved. The media was quick to sensationalize any and everything from real criminal cases to cases that turned out to just all be lies and manipulated hoaxes. All the headlines and TV stations were often broadcasting warnings of satanic cults. Every week there was a new story, and the media helped to convince the public that Satan was invading. As the panic began to sort of build up, the fear was palpable, and it led to a wave of accusations, trials, and convictions that would later be proven to be based on flimsy evidence and outright lies. Also, just a reminder too, the media made tons of money from advertising and so forth during all these shock stories that they had on the news too. The next thing that happened was still 1980, but this is when D&D became the gateway for the devil.
D&D, and it's become popular with children anywhere from grammar school on up.
Yeah, but it's just your character that does it on the sheet of paper.
Not so with a lot of adults, and says there are 28 deaths related to Dungeons and Dragons.
We're really talking about intense involvement in a very serious form of violence.
She felt so strongly that it was responsible for her son's death that she formed a network of concerned people to warn others about the dangerous aspects of the game.
In 1980, James Dallas Egbert III went missing for a month from his dorm room. He was young and he was sort of like a child prodigy, so he was kind of young and he was on his own at university. But during the investigation, the police found D&D game materials in his room, and they decided that it was related to his disappearance. Then they linked D&D to Satanism because of the role-playing and make-believe. The police, however, soon found his body and found out that he had overdosed, and his journals actually showed that he was dealing with a lot of depression, and people said that he went down the path of drugs and addiction. Even though his D&D friends told the police and the press that he hadn't been playing with them much anymore since he discovered drugs, it didn't matter. People ran with D&D is what caused his death, and D&D is the gateway to the devil. A sort of propaganda movie, made-for-TV movie, was made shortly after. It was actually called Mazes and Monsters, and it was made about James, but it was Tom Hanks' first role. In that movie, it shows the kids playing an RPG tabletop game and getting lost in the fantasy. Essentially, they hallucinate and lose touch with reality, and they can't tell what's real and what isn't real. And it sort of makes a bit of, I don't know, it's not really respectful to what James went through, but then it just further added onto the whole D&D is evil thing, and a bunch of parents just got more and more scared of D&D. So it pretty much just became like, oh, this is like a gateway to devil worship, essentially. The next event that happened was 1983, and it was the McMartin Preschool Trial in Manhattan Beach, California.
The McMartin Preschool in Manhattan Beach, as it looked when we photographed it discreetly just 3 weeks ago.
Local reporter Wayne Satz of KABC in Los Angeles broke the story.
It started out here in Manhattan Beach looking like an isolated incident. One mother noticed that her son was having nightmares. Authorities now believe that at least 60, and that the ultimate number could well be much greater.
7 nursery school teachers were arraigned today.
The accused include the preschool owner, 76-year-old Virginia McMartin, her daughter, and 2 grandchildren.
The media blitz demonstrated unstinting belief that this had happened.
It was sensational.
1,400.
Decades later, while the McMartin case has been largely forgotten, its impact lives on. It wasn't long before accusations were being reported at 7 other daycare centers in LA County alone.
Investigators were at the Hickory Preschool in Torrance earlier today.
And then, fear spread across the country, eventually targeting scores of daycare centers.
The McMartin trial was one of the most infamous cases in the Satanic Panic. The media went crazy with it. At that point in time, it was the trial of the century. It was a perfect storm of hysteria, confusion, and misinformation. The trial relied pretty much solely on the testimony of the children, testimony that was obtained through suggestive interrogation techniques. Authorities manipulated these kids into repeating the narrative that they wanted to ensure a conviction. But how did it all begin? Well, in 1983, Judy Johnson, the mother of a boy she had going to that preschool at the time. I won't get into the details what she found exactly, but essentially she kept literally poking and prodding at a sore on her child, and when she took him to a doctor, the doctor also didn't properly treat it. He didn't even give cream or anything for it. Eventually, it got worse, and Judy convinced herself that it was caused by a worker at the daycare. The person that she accused was both her estranged husband, who obviously she had an extra grind with him, but also she accused McMartin teacher Ray Buckey. Buckey was the grandson of the school's founder, Virginia McMartin, and son of Administrator Peggy McMartin Buckey. Judy ended up reporting it to the police, and some sources say that when they interviewed her son, he at first denied it until they kept pushing and doing their coercion techniques, and then he admitted that he was hurt by Ray Buckey. Buckey was then brought in for questioning, but he wasn't prosecuted due to lack of evidence. The police then sent a form letter to about 200 parents of students at the McMartin school, asking them to question their children. The letter pretty much coached the parents on how to manipulate their children into telling them whatever they want to hear. And this is the whole problem here, is they pretty much taught the parents how to coerce their children into false confessions.
The mother of the first complaining child was psychotic, but they just kept on going. It was like the Titanic. It was like a roller coaster or a ship that just was out of control and couldn't stop.
The police released Buckey for lack of evidence, but then they sent out this letter to some 200 families, instructing them to question their children about
What happens then is the parents start to talk to their kids, and then they start to talk to each other, and then they start to compare notes, and pretty soon emotionally involved parents are engaging in leading and suggestive questioning of the child.
So in the end, the police got what they wanted from the parents, and they began the trial against the daycare workers. The trial was marked by unbelievable accusations of satanic rituals, sacrifice, flying witches, traveling across continents and back in a day, and so forth. It was a lot of really ridiculous statements that were made. All of the daycare workers were on trial, and it lasted for years. By January 1990, Peggy McMartin Buckey was acquitted on all counts, and Ray Buckey was cleared on 52 of the 65 counts. 9 of the 11 jurors at the press conference following, they stated that they believed that the children had been hurt, but there was no evidence to prove it. So essentially, all their decisions were being made on these false confessions and false statements, coerced statements. And all this testimony that was submitted, like the majority of it was so outlandish. Like, people don't fly like a witch. Like, why was that even approved as testimony? And nobody seemed to question it back then. And I just find it so crazy that nobody questioned this. 11 of the 13 jurors who remained by the end of the trial voted to acquit Bucky of the charges. The refusal of the remaining 2 to vote for a not guilty verdict actually resulted in a deadlock, which meant that there would be a second trial. So, Ray Bucky was retried later on 6 of the 13 counts which he was not acquitted in the first trial. The second trial opened on May 7, 1990, and it resulted in another hung jury on July 27, 1990. The prosecution then decided to just give up. Trying to obtain a conviction wasn't going to happen, and they closed the case with all charges against Ray dismissed. Ray had been jailed for 5 years without ever being convicted of committing any crime. The case lasted 7 years in total, and it cost $15 million. It's the longest and most expensive criminal case in the history of the United States legal system, and ultimately resulted in no convictions at all. And that $15 million came from taxpayers, and it went to pay all these fake experts and lawyers and everyone else who was just supporting a complete trial of lies. Even though all the charges were dropped and people were acquitted, their namesake was done. Like, people just didn't trust them. The McMartin preschool was closed and the building was demolished. In 2005, one of the children, as an adult, retracted the allegations, came forward and said, like, hey, I was being manipulated. The next big event that really affected the Satanic Panic was in 1993, and that was the West Memphis 3. On May 5th, 1993, 3 8-year-old boys, Stephen Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, were reported missing in West Memphis, Arkansas. Their bodies were eventually found, and the police decided that the scene looked like some sort of cult activity took place.
West Memphis, Arkansas, a small, close-knit community with lots of parks and places to play. The perfect place for 3 all-American, fun-loving kids like Michael Moore, Christopher Byers, and Stephen Branch to go out and pal around. 8 days ago, the boys went for an afternoon bike ride, but by nightfall hadn't returned home.
Police zeroed in on Damien Eccles and his friend Jason Baldwin, who were known to authorities due to past shoplifting and vandalism charges, as well as enjoying heavy metal music.
Damien Eccles, 18, Jesse Miskelly, 17, and Jason Baldwin, 16.
Started out with Damien immediately because he was, according to the juvenile officer, the only person in West Memphis who could pull this off. The weird kid, the kid that dressed in all black, had long black hair, listened to the wrong kind of music, read the wrong kind of books. Not making this up, they actually introduced Stephen King novels in the evidence that were found in Damien's trailer in the trailer park. And along with Metallica t-shirt, it was just insane. Then this horrible satanic panic just then descended upon the town.
Immediately, Stidham knew Miss Kelly was different from how he was portrayed.
We just kind of went over a statement that he'd given the West Memphis Police. And not only did he start getting the things wrong that he'd already gotten wrong, but he actually got the bodies mixed up.
There was a witness, a friend of theirs named Vicky, that came forward, and she said that she watched the unaliving but didn't see who did it. And she said the suspects were friends with the boys that were unalived. The police ended up getting Jesse Miskelly to admit to the crime, but the issue with him is his IQ was only 72, and people said that he was easily manipulated, and the police used Vicky, a friend of theirs, to manipulate him into confessing. Later on, after the fact, Vicky did come forward and admitted that the police manipulated her to do all these things in the case. She did some other things too, if you want to look it up. So the situation now, though, is that Damien was facing the death penalty. Due to the dubious nature of the evidence and the lack of evidence in general. As well, there was a bunch of emotional bias in the case, so it ended up generating a lot of controversy, and it was the subject of several documentaries. Celebrities and musicians held fundraisers to help support efforts to free the men as well. In 1996, HBO released a documentary called Paradise Lost, and in turn, that documentary made the public turn against the courts, and they were all saying, like, these boys are innocent, you're just trying to convict them on flimsy to no evidence, just personal bias. Later on, a hair ended up being found in the evidence, and it linked back to the stepfather of one of the boys, and another hair to that stepfather's friends. Even though there's a whole thing, they denied it and all this other stuff. Regardless, the evidence clears the boys, so a judge wanted to clear their convictions. So in 2011, they approached the boys with an Alford plea, essentially that they maintained their innocence, but they admit that there was enough evidence to charge them, and if they sign this, they can't sue them.
They're free. The men, known as the West Memphis Three, were released from prison Friday, 18 years after they were convicted of the shocking of these 8-year-old boys.
It's been an absolute living hell.
And honestly, those boys would have won if they went forward with the case, but one of them was already facing the death penalty, and they might not have been able to overturn it and win properly in court before that happened. So they were kind of pressured into a corner to sign this Alford plea. Since they were released and since all that happened, nobody has been charged. In fact, they told everyone that the evidence was lost in a fire, and when people looked into it, all the fire stations and everyone were saying that there were no fires, so they're not sure what they're talking about. Then they ended up finding the evidence miraculously one day, and people are hoping that they're going to continue the investigation and actually follow through with it. I don't have faith in that, though, unfortunately. There were a lot of other events too that affected the Satanic Panic. I'll go through a list of some other ones, but there's tons more than this. This is just a high-level list of some key ones. Those cases were the most important, but I'll just go through a list of some of the other ones that did affect things as well throughout the world. In 1986, Australia held a large symposium focused on SRA, and they were pretty much spreading the misinformation to health professionals and law enforcement. And they made a bunch of money off of the symposium because this was a hot topic at the time. In 1987, the UK began writing about the Satanic Panic, which started the same panic in their region too. People began being accused of SRA, satanic cults started being reported. There's something nicknamed the British McMartin, which was the Nottingham investigation. It resulted in criminal charges, but ultimately was found to have nothing to do with satanic rituals. Eventually, it was criticized for focusing on the irrelevant and non-existent satanic aspects of the allegations at the expense of the real crimes that were actually going on. In 1988, Geraldo Rivera's specials had a huge effect on public opinion. He made a ton of money off these. He had a bunch of specials regarding Satanism. It wasn't good. In 1989, San Francisco police detective Sandy Gallant and other therapists began interviewing and touring the UK to talk about SRA, and shortly after, a bunch of SRA cases began popping up in the different areas that they were in. As well, they made a bunch of money off of these talks in this tour. In 1992, charges were laid in the Martinsville satanic scandal. Charges were overturned in 1995 on the grounds of improper interviewing of the children. 1991, a wave of SRA accusations appeared in New Zealand. 1992, the same in Norway. In 1996, Egypt tabloids started publishing articles about the subculture of Satanism and rituals and so forth. And they pretty much said that it was amongst teens and youth, middle to upper class, and they associated it with the music industry, especially heavy metal and bands and so forth. The public intrigue eventually led to the security apparatus raiding the homes of a bunch of young people and their friends, and it was like people in the music scene. They confiscated their posters, their tapes, their CDs, and they forced them to cut their hair, and then they subjected them to religious reformation before releasing them. So they pretty much arrested them and then made them take religious reformation courses. So that sounds very unpleasant, honestly. The main panic did eventually calm down as the public began to start seeing the issues with these cases. The lack of evidence and the skeptics began reporting, and the public, well, the majority of the public anyways, began to actually listen to what they had to say. Skepticism and exposing the truth. As time went on, different court cases were lost or dropped because no evidence. Lawsuits against therapists were being won, and the truth was beginning to be seen properly by people. All the misinformation really started with suggestive interviewing. A 2006 case study goes into a lot of detail on this. If you want to read up on it, I'll link in my references as well. But they explain too that suggestive questioning refers to an interview situation where the interviewer provides a persistent suggestion and the interpretation of an event to a child.
But the therapists at CII believed they knew what had happened.
Mr. Parrott, can you help Susie?
I can't say that I ever saw a videotape said this happened to me. Never of their own account, spontaneously.
The interviews are upsetting to read because essentially what happened is the therapist unintentionally coerced them into fabricating stories of it. You have interviews that will start off with a therapist asking whether they had ever played any
At McMartin, this was a huge topic, and they initially say, no. The therapist, though, didn't accept those answers. So then they repeat the question, and then they repeat it again. Eventually, they realize that their interview is never going to be allowed to end until they start giving the interviewer the kind of answer that she wants to hear.
It was obvious in the interviews that all kinds of techniques were highly suggestible, highly pressuring, and is capable of creating false memories, often permanent memories.
A number of excellent studies have been carried out on interviewing for forensic purposes ever since the Satanic Panic situation. Essentially, they're advising people tread carefully with interviewing children as they're very susceptible to suggestion. So what eventually put an end to the majority of the panic? Well, let's delve into that. Public rejection. Media coverage of SRA began to turn negative by 1987, and the panic ended between 92 and 95. The release of the HBO made-for-TV movie Indictment, the McMartin Trial in 1995, it actually recast Ray Buckey as a victim of an overzealous prosecution. This marked a big change in public perceptions of the SRA accusations. As well, in 95, Geraldo Rivera also issued an apology for his different specials. I think it was 1987 and 1988. And the specials focused on cults and Satanism and all that stuff too. So he essentially kind of forced his hand to apologize for the damage that he did, because he did add a lot of fuel to the fire, essentially. In 1996, astrophysicist and astrobiologist Carl Sagan devoted an entire chapter of his final book. The final book was called The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. And he devoted the chapter to a critique on the claims of recovered memories when it came to alien abductions and SRA. And in his chapter, he also cited material from the newsletter of False Memory Syndrome Foundation as well. If you're not familiar with Carl Sagan, I suggest you look into him. He was very good, very influential as well. By 2003, allegations of SRA were met with great skepticism, and belief in it was no longer considered mainstream in the professional circles. So essentially, they were able to pressure it out of professional circles, which, then helps in general. Some of the public still believe that it's going on. Another thing that helped end the panic as well was publications and law enforcement. They began to actually analyze the stuff and make public statements, whether it was through reports written or public, novels. Scholars and law enforcement. Kenneth Lanning, FBI expert in the investigation of crimes against children. He is also an author as well, and he created this book, which I'll put on the screen here for you. Lanning has stated that as pseudo-Satanism may exist in the world, of course it probably does because there is Satanism as religion, but he says there is little or no evidence for large-scale breeding, sacrifice, and organized conspiracies, satanic conspiracies. In 1994, Lanning produced a monograph on SRA that was aimed at the authorities, essentially monographs like a report. This report had gone over hundreds of cases and found none of them actually had confirmed or proven SRA. In fact, they all turned out to be completely false, and after his report was made public, several convictions based on SRA had been overturned and people were released from jail. So he played a huge role in actually reversing a lot of this stuff and making people realize and listen, actually. Lanning often talked about common sense things, making people realize that the stuff reported was impossible. He was clearing the mud from the water, essentially. For example, he would point out things like, hey, you realize people can't actually fly, right? So why are we convicting someone based on testimony that says that? Does it make sense these kids could have been flown to Mexico, used in some sort of ritual, and flown back to the daycare to be picked up by their parents all within 8 hours or less every day? Yes, this was something that was reported that happened. He was pointing out the obvious ridiculousness of some of the statements and saying if that's in there, then we shouldn't be, we should be critiquing the rest of the statement if something that ridiculous is in there as well. And then people started listening.
Belief was sorely tested as investigators searched for physical evidence to back up what the children were saying.
Nobody that could be linked to what describing has ever been found.
There should have been little kisses. There should have been all over the preschool. They didn't have any of that.
And what about those early claims of satanic?
There certainly have been mentally ill people who have gone out and people quote in the name of Satan, but there's never been any proof that there was any kind of satanic cult activity in a daycare center.
When I first got involved in these cases, I'll be very honest with you, I tended to believe that this was going on, but eventually the number of cases just kept growing and growing and growing, and at some point I came to the realization This many people can't be doing this to this many victims for this long and not leaving any corroborative evidence behind. It just doesn't work that way.
What we're left with at this point, the evidence is so slim that it does not go beyond the mere accusation.
So Lanning pretty much proved that all the children testimony was hogwash and manipulated. Then he went on to suggest that the adults who testified to SRA, it might be because of a few reasons. And he said in a quote, pathological distortion, traumatic memory, normal childhood fears and fantasies, misperception, and confusion.
For use in satanic rituals may really be happening.
My daughter had a son and offered to Satan.
These women say they speak from personal experience.
I told her it's the highest honor I could ever do as a woman. I was so brainwashed, I believed.
Today she helps other women, like Donna, who are trying to break free.
Cases involving satanic symbolism were all people who were being influenced by the media around the Satanic Panic. The majority of these people knew nothing about Satanism, and they didn't have these views about it until the media started talking about the hoax of satanic stories. So people who we seen get arrested for different attacks and sort of stuff like that in the name of Satan, they claim to be Satanists, but they're actually referred to as non-traditional Satanists by the Satanic Church because they're not following the traditional religion if they're choosing to unalive people. Pretty much they're the same as any other person who unalives in the name of religion. Satanism didn't cause them to do it. They're just bad people in general. And it could be Satanism, it could be something else. It didn't really matter. It was going to happen regardless. Another influential person as well in book is author Jeffery Victor, and he wrote the book The Satanic Panic, The Creation of a Contemporary Legend. Jeffrey reviewed 67 rumors about SRA in the United States and Canada reported in newspapers or television, and he found no evidence supporting the existence of any of these cults. Another author, Dr. Jean LaFontaine, she wrote a book, Speak of the Devil. LaFontaine states that the cases of alleged SRA investigated in the United Kingdom were reviewed in detail, and the majority were all unsubstantiated as well. It's like a lot of these books were sort of like analysis of like different cases and so forth that came out. She found with those cases too, none involved witches, Sabbath, or devil worship that are all characteristics of the allegations of satanic involvement. LaFontaine also states that no material evidence has been forthcoming in allegations of SRA. There's been no bones, bodies, no fluids, nothing in either the United States or Britain. Now, I will concede that Lanning and these other authors obviously did make money too from these books, but in my opinion, making money on published studies that show proof that a bad thing that's hurting society is bad, I personally don't have an issue with making money off stuff like that. I more have an issue, like, this is a more moral way to make the money off of these sort of things, but that's my opinion. Like, you can feel free to disagree, and that's your opinion, that's okay too. I feel it's more of an issue if you're making money off of lies and things that are hurting people, right? Also, the only way we can really fight misinformation is by also publishing too. So we're sort of stuck in a catch-22 when it comes to this stuff. For every book of lies, we should aim to also publish a book of truth. Otherwise, our bookshelves and our libraries are going to just be filled with the lies. It's a necessity for us to publish these things and release media that disproves cases and rumors and hoaxes. But anyway, the Satanic Panic, it left as quickly as it started, but how did it start so easily? Why was it that people believed in it as soon as the slightest hint of a story showed up? Why did the media and law enforcement leaders jump on board within the snap of a finger? Well, you see, all this actually began before the Michelle Remembers book. And I went back trying to figure out who is really the catalyst for it. And what truly started it was a few key books and movies from the 60s and 70s. And oddly enough, the memories of the adults, the memories that they'd recover during these hypnotizing sessions with therapists, they were clearly adapted from these films. Like, they pretty much gave a scene that you would have seen in the film and put themselves in it as well. Books and films. To start us off, and this is the number one thing that really affected it, but this one came out first, was Rosemary's Baby. It actually started with a book that was released in 1968.
Oh, it's a wonderful apartment. I love it.
See what she's trying to do? She's trying to get you to lower the rent.
Oh, you're pregnant? No, not yet. You?
Congratulations.
You're pregnant.
Now to a fine, healthy baby. Here.
Yeah. Pain like that is a warning that something isn't right. It's alive! Oh, man! What have you done to him, you maniac?
started with a book first. The author is Ira Levin. From the afterword in the book, in the 2003 edition, he explains where he gets the idea for the story. So Ira got the idea for the story because he thought a fetus could be an effective horror if the reader knew it was growing into something different from the baby that was expected. 9 whole months of anticipation with the horror inside the heroine. He then goes on to explain that he debated what kind of creature it would be growing into, and he said, "Genuine medical horrors were out, hardly the stuff of popular fiction. I could only imagine only 2 possibilities. My unfortunate heroine had to either be impregnated by an extraterrestrial or the devil. ETs had already fathered children in The Midwich Cuckoos, a novel by John Wyndham, and though that book had dealt with several children growing up rather than their mothers bearing them, I nonetheless felt I was stuck with Satan, in whom I believed nothing at all." He then went on to read up on witchcraft and he started writing his novel. He was actually worried that people would hate it because the book was essentially the opposite version of Mary and Jesus. But sure enough, everyone loved the book and it became a bestseller and eventually the movie. The next piece of media that affected the Satanic Panic was The Exorcist. And The Exorcist was a horror novel written in 1971, written by American writer William Peter Blatty.
Where'd this come from? I found it. You're gonna die up there.
I need reassignment. You're the best I've got. I think I've lost my faith.
You ever heard of exorcism?
How do you go about getting an exorcism?
I beg your pardon? I'm Damien Karras. I'd like to help you. Where's Reagan? In here with us. I believe we should begin. Avoid conversations where the demon is. The demon is a liar. He will mix lies with the truth
Why, Jimmy?
to attack us. Do not listen.
You don't think this is my daughter.
It is he who commands you. The power of Christ compels you. It was an excellent day for an exorcism.
Aspects of the novel were actually inspired by a real exorcism in 1949 of a young boy from Cottage City, Maryland. The boy was sent to his relative's home on Roanoke Drive in St. Louis, where most of the exorcism actually took place. However, it is said that there was a ton of evidence that indicated that the boy had serious emotional problems from his home life, and there's not one shred of hard evidence to support that he was even possessed. The movie was released in 1973, just a couple years after the book. And our third most influential piece of media is The Omen from 1976.
For generations, the Thorns have been a family of tremendous wealth, position, and power. The perfect marriage of Ambassador Robert Thorne and his wife Catherine was fulfilled by the birth of their son, Damien. And then, when the child was 5 years old, something terrible happened. Was it a coincidence? Or was it an omen?
Look at me, Damien. It's all for you.
Mr. Thorne, the night your son was born, I saw its mother. I saw its mother. This is not a human child. Make no mistake.
Who is he? What does he want? Where did he come from? And can he be stopped?
So The Omen is based on a screenplay by American screenwriter David Seltzer. Seltzer novelized the movie in a book that was also released in 1976, just weeks before the movie was released. So for this particular one, it was actually the screenplay written before the book. According to producer Harvey Bernhard, the idea of a motion picture about the Antichrist came after a discussion about the Bible with Bob Munger, a friend of Bernhard's. When Munger told him about the idea in 1973, the producer immediately contacted screenwriter David Seltzer and hired him to write the screenplay. So these books and movies played a very pivotal role in actually the acceptance of the Satanic Panic, but a few other things leading up to the 1980s did also affect things as well. Spiritualism movements. There was a reaction against the surge of new religious movements that started in the 1960s. As well, a new one came up, and that was the Church of Satan. And this pretty much arises from the counterculture of the baby boomer generation, sometimes called the cult wars or the cult scare, kind of was occurring as well with this particular side of New Age movement and spiritualism. This linked back to Satanism that was created. The Satanic Bible was written by Anton LaVey in 1969, and it's essentially just a collection of essays, observations, and basic satanic rituals, and it outlines LaVey's satanic ideology. It contains the core principles of the LaVey version of Satanism, and is considered the foundation of the philosophy and dogma that constitutes all Satanism. The people have had like different Satanist church and things like that, and there's been like different Satanist followings as well. It's just LaVey's version, but a lot of people nowadays kind of base initially on LaVey's stuff, and then they build up from there on whatever church they're designing, because that is a thing that happens. Satanism is actually very simple, and it's not as exciting as the media would like you to believe. The mission on the Satanic Temple is to encourage benevolence and empathy, reject tyrannical authority, advocate practical common sense, oppose injustice, and undertake noble pursuits. That's a quote from their website. Like, that being said, when I was younger, my mom let me choose my religion at a certain point. She just told me to read up everything. And I read his Bible, because, you know, Satanist Anton LaVey Bible, because I was curious, like, what all the fuss was about. I read through it, and, like, all of it is just, like, you do what you want for you in your moment, whatever makes you happy. It's kind of like a Bible of, like, where you embrace being, like, a narcissist, or you embrace being self-centered. Like, that's all Satanism is really, truly about. And it's about, like, rejecting the church and authority and things like that, and you just live your life for you, kind of deal. Like, that's the general gist of it anyway. What's really interesting, if you're curious, Anton LaVey's daughter, Zena LaVey, and she's still alive, she is a dead ringer for Taylor Swift. Like, she looks just like her. It's crazy. But I'm going to show you a clip of her, and I'm going to show you a couple clips. This one clip here, I just want to include it. Geraldo's asking her, who's like the daughter of Satanism, right? Princess of Satanism, they call her. And he's asking her, well, first I don't know if he's asking her, but he asks, what is Satanism? She goes to answer it. And then he like directs the question to the man sitting beside her. And just her face is just hilarious. She's like, okay, I guess that this is how this is going to go. So I'm just going to include this clip because I found her reaction quite amusing.
Thousands, easily.
What is it? Dr. Aquino, the high priest of the Church of Set.
And a lot of people interpret the church and like its ideals a little bit differently too. I'm just going to play you what this Set temple guy, he actually kind of created his own church, which is a little bit separate from Anton LaVey's thing. Anyways, his story is a weird one too. But I'll just include his like little quote here from the Geraldo show.
What is Satanism?
Well, originally, the Church of Satan, when it was founded, was composed not of people with a hatred for Christianity, but of people who, by and large, were agnostics and atheists, because they felt that the institutions which had arisen around Christianity had failed in their moral commitment. So Satanism itself became an emphasis on rational self-interest and on taking responsibility for your own intellectual and ethical decisions.
Rational self-interest, you call it?
Yes.
Yeah, and the way he describes it there is good as well. Like you get the general gist of it. I think like to truly understand all the nuances of it, you kind of read the book. But you know, what he's explaining there is pretty much it.
Church and its offshoots are constitutionally protected religions.
I believe that hate is necessary in a controlled way just as much as love is necessary.
LaVey penned the best-selling Satanic Bible. It's the handbook of devil worshippers everywhere.
And that's just a clip of Anton LaVey as well, a little soundbite of what he says the religion is. Obviously, it's more detailed than that. Serial unalivers. Additionally, at this time, people were also on edge because of serial unalivers. You know, if you know what I mean, SK. Crime was up and people were scared. Some of these folks also used Satan as an excuse, or they were dabbling in the occult. So their crimes, they tried to say that the devil made them do it, or they did it for the devil. Some examples of these particular criminals are Richard Ramirez, Henry Lee Lucas, the Ripper Crew, Berkowitz, although he talks about Satan affecting him later after he's already charged and he says he's like a born-again Christian. And that same as Manson too. Some people try to relate him back to Satanism. He was never a Satanist. Anything Satan-related happened like after he was arrested. That's something else to always look at is when it actually occurred, because they kind of were doing this stuff during the Satanic Panic times. It was either people caught during the Satanic Panic times, or they changed their stance during these times. There's obviously other one-off criminals, but the majority of these people use Satan as an excuse to unalive someone because they wanted to. They were going to do it regardless. They don't need Satan as really an excuse. And that's the difference here. Religion didn't make them do anything. They're just trying to use that as an excuse to try to explain away their bad deeds, right? There's other offshoots who actually did choose to do it because they thought that Satan would give them something in return. And those few few cases that do exist out there, they learned that from the media. So if the Satanic Panic wasn't going on, if the media wasn't going crazy with this stuff, they wouldn't have like put that as an idea in their head, and they might not have went forward with it. Although I think if you're that type of person who's willing to do that stuff, you were going to do it at some point anyway in your life. Feminism and the family unit. Lastly, the thing that really affected it and what kind of led up to the Satanic Panic was the state of the family unit and feminism at this time. So this was about the time where we were going through another change. Women were getting rights and they were working more, and we're having a 2-income household. And it was starting to break down the American, 1950s, whatever vision that people had. But the thing is that these women were going to work and they were leaving their kids at a daycare. So there's a bit of like guilt that people were giving women that were doing this, and women were worried about their kids being left with essentially strangers. And so like this kind of did play a big role in it as well. It was sort of like a mother's guilt thing. And then they incorporated this satanic stuff in there, and it just kind of blew up and went way out of proportion too. So those are the things that were happening before 1980, the things that made it so easily acceptable, why people were able to jump on it so quickly. It was kind of like the base information and base setup to kind of explode everything in the 80s. But what about the people who cashed in on the panic itself? We're going to talk about them next. The grifters of the panic. During times like these, panic and hysteria, there are often a handful of people at least who actually see what's really happening, and they decide to take advantage of people's fears and anxieties so they can make a quick buck during this time. And let's take a look at some of the biggest offenders during this period. Also, these people grew big because of the Satanic Panic, and they went on to maintain their grift and make money off the public for decades after. All right, our first one on the list is Geraldo Rivera. Geraldo Rivera is an American journalist, attorney, author, and political commentator. He hosted the tabloid talk show Geraldo from 1987 to 1998. He went on to work at the Fox News Channel from 2001 to 2023. Geraldo has a laundry list of issues in his career. I'd recommend, if you're interested, Google Geraldo Rivera apology and go through the first few pages of Google search results. Like, you'll see the first one is going to be, go to like page 2, 3, 4, like read through them all, and you'll see his history, his true history. He has a habit of accusing people, turning it into a big grand standing scene on TV, so everyone jumps on board with attacking said person, and he never seemed to have any thought into what he was doing. He only showed remorse after people eventually realized what he did, and he's pressured by public opinion to apologize. He recently apologized because of a documentary that was on Netflix, if you do Google him. Oh, also, look at what he did and what came to light about him during the Me Too movement. There's 2 things that he did if you look into that as well. I won't delve into that here, but I suggest that you do take a look into him and do some reading about the things that he was involved in and things that he did. In the end, he made tons of money off the fame he gained by trampling over everyone, using his Jerry Springer-esque talk show to spread falsities. I know we haven't talked about him on this channel before, mainly because he isn't really part of the paranormal industry, but in this case, he did step his foot in here, and he made his money off of creating fear, hatred, and a witch hunt during the Satanic Panic. Our next one on the list is our big offender, the Warrens. And I'm going to kind of just go off script with this one and go off my memory. But if you've watched any of my other shows, any of my other, series, the Warren series, I suggest that you do watch through it because I go into a lot more detail. But essentially, the Warrens first started out as just ghost hunters. They were investigating haunted places. After The Exorcist came out and was so popular, the movie, they then started changing things from being haunted to things where everyone's possessed by a demon. Everything is a demon related. And they did this knowingly. They knew what they were doing. They were trying to, put more pizzazz on their image and trying to sell themselves more. They were essentially turning themselves into a traveling movie. So they knowingly switched that up. They knowingly did all these things. Every time Ed would show up at a haunted location and he would tell people, oh, you know how much money you can make off of this? He's quoted as saying that to different investigators too, and different people as well on scene. They completely took advantage of the Satanic Panic. They took advantage of people being scared of demons and Satanism as well. They hid behind the Catholic Church and they used that to sell themselves. And in my opinion, they knew what they were doing from day one. They went into all of this knowing the plan. and their plan was to grift. And they just hit the right time, the right moment at the right time. People didn't know much about ghosts. People were scared. People were scared of the spirit world. People were scared of Satanism and demons. And they just hopped on that bandwagon and went crazy. And knowing too how popular the books and movies and everything were as well, they found their way into Hollywood too to make sure that they made their money off of that as well. The Warrens are very calculated, and they 100% took advantage of everything that was going on during this time. From even before the Satanic Panic to when it started, they were ready to go, and they were ready to hop on board with anything related to demons, Satanism, etc. So they're one of our worst offenders, and just in general, they carried on for a while too. Geraldo, he became famous. He had a show, he had probably made some money off syndication, whatever, but the Warrens made like big money, and they kept going. And even now to this day, their relatives still own their IP, and they run these Warrens conferences, and paranormal investigators go to them. Like, they make tons of money off of us, off of people that are interested in the paranormal community. And that's something that I don't like, which is why I keep making stuff about them, because I'm hoping eventually paranormal investigators will see these things and question why they're giving any money to anything involved with the Warrens, why they're even, agreeing with any sort of hauntings or anything that was reported by the Warrens. You need to question everything that they were doing, because they went in with a plan and they knew exactly what they were doing. All right, sorry, that was my rant. You guys know how many episodes I've done on the Warrens already, so it's just all built up. There's more to come too. I'm working on a bunch of stuff as well. You guys will be surprised, I think, pleasantly on some of the things that are coming up for the Warrens. Now, next on our list is Ted Gunderson. He's actually an FBI agent, or ex-FBI agent. He was a special agent in charge and head of the Los Angeles FBI. He's also an author, and he's a conspiracy theorist. After retiring from the FBI, I think he retired around the 80s or so. It was like he was retired when the Satanic Panic started. Gunderson set up a private investigation firm, and he set his firm up around 1980. Gunderson, honestly, he's a kook. And a lot of what he talks about is very close to the QAnon stuff. So I suspect that he fuels it, or I don't know if maybe he's one of the people that writes the posts about it. I don't know. But he's a leading figure for the far right, and he's an anti-government conspiracy theorist. Gunderson inserted himself into the McMartin case, and he became the recognized spokesman on the dangers of the satanic cults. And he would show up on TV and news and different talk shows as well. Geraldo featured him all the time as well. His past role as an FBI agent made him like Teflon to any suspicions and attacks. Just because he had that in his background, people, took everything he said to heart and believed everything he had to say. Even now, there's still like a small group of people who are still believing everything he's saying. But let's talk about some of the things he says. Well, in 1995, conference in Dallas, Gunderson warned about secret occult groups, a new world order, and a shadow government. He then went on to say that 4,000 ritual unalivings are performed in New York every year, 4,000 a year. And he also said that the building that was, in Oklahoma was done by the government. And we all know someone was arrested for that, and it wasn't done by the government. And when that person got arrested, then he's like, oh, that guy's under mind control. This guy's a kook. Gunderson's a kook. Gunderson also claimed that the US government was preparing for mass executions by setting up 1,000 internment camps and purchasing 30,000 guillotines as well. So, this is the stuff that comes out of his mouth. He definitely, it's just a few examples, but he definitely is cuckoo. And he did make money off the Satanic Panic. He sells books. He shows up on radio shows and stuff. He does TV spots and everything. I don't know. I feel I wonder if he knows what he's doing. Either he had a brain injury and it made him lose his marbles, or he saw the Satanic Panic going on and thought, oh, I could cash in on this with my FBI status and just say a bunch of crazy things. And maybe once he started doing stuff for the Satanic Panic, then he got this following, and then he has to kind of lean into it more, which is why he got crazier and crazier with the things that he said, and he's just cashing in on that fame. Because he ran the LA office, and I just don't think that someone who's running that office would be thinking like this. I don't know. I wonder if he knows exactly what he's doing. I'm curious if he actually is well aware of what he's doing. Now, this leads us to Sylvia Browne, because Gunderson actually backed Sylvia Browne. He said she was the best psychic the FBI has ever worked with. But a report in the Skeptical Inquirer pulled FOIAs that showed that Browne never worked with the FBI, and in fact, she was being investigated for fraud by them. If you want to learn more about Sylvia Browne, I suggest that you check out my episode that I did on her as well. But essentially, she started as a psychic. Yeah, it was around even the 70s, I believe, that she was doing it. So she was doing it leading up into the Satanic Panic. And she was on the, bandwagon of the New Age spiritualist movement. But she inserted herself into criminal cases, and she especially inserted herself into anything that involved children. So, I didn't really find anything like directly that she did with the Satanic Panic, but she was doing stuff with Gunderson, and she was giving people readings based on their children and everything that were going missing and stuff. So I really wouldn't be surprised if she was also doing or trying to do some stuff with the Satanic Panic in behind the scenes too, because she was doing some stuff in cahoots with Gunderson. I'm going to add her to the list here because she was friends with him and he backed her and everything, and I feel like there is a connection there. And she was making money off of this stuff and making money off the fears of parents and everything too, even during this time when the Satanic Panic was going on as well. If you want to learn more about her, I definitely recommend that you check out my episode that I did on her as well. Lastly, we have authors of fake books. Now, there's a bunch of different authors. I just pulled some that were notable as I was doing my research, but there's more than this that made money off fake books. So the first author I have on my list is Lauren Stratford, and she wrote Satan's Underground, The Extraordinary Story of One Woman's Escape. She was featured on Geraldo Rivera a bunch too, and she would rescue women from satanic cults. She spread a lot of false stories about breeding and then the Satanism and the cults and everything like that. And the thing is, like, her book has been just sort of proven as a hoax too, and her book is really bad. Like, you can tell it's all lies. The next person on the list is Ted Patrick, and more than an author, but he's actually a cult deprogrammer, and he's a very bad man. He made money off being hired by families who had good intentions of helping family members get out of a cult. Although I just want to add here, he was also hired by families who wanted to deprogram their children because their children were attracted to the same sex. So essentially deprogramming the LGBTQ members, and we all know that path that takes. The things that he did to deprogram people were very horrible. And as well, throughout his deprogramming career, he often faced charges of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, assault, and things of that nature. He just went too far all the time with what he was doing. If you want to look into it some more, go ahead and Google it. I'll just give you trigger warnings on that one. He's not a good man, but he made a bunch of money off the backs of people's fears with cults and Satanism and everything too. Also, as a side note, you can't deprogram people. That's just a myth. So he was just selling falsities and lies, and he knew that none of this stuff was working. He was well aware of what he was doing. All right, next author I have on the list is Mike Warnke. His best-selling 1972 memoir, The Satan Seller, he claimed to have led a group of 1,500 Satanists that engaged in, bad things. I won't say on YouTube, including unaliving people. He said that he led these 1,500 people before he converted to an evangelical Christianity. The book was praised by Moody Monthly and the Christian Century, but 2 decades later, the book has been debunked by an evangelical magazine, of all things, The Cornerstone. So it's an interesting story. He was trying to do like this whole I found God thing, blah, 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 but he ended up being debunked by his own people, so... There's obviously more books and more authors that were out there. Another one that I noticed, like, going through too, there's people that wrote books based on third-party accounts. Like, they would go to a conference or they would go to a training or whatever. Then they'd write a book about it, but they never experienced it. And those people are even shadier, I think, because they're not even writing from their own experiences. They're not even making stuff up. They're writing from third-party experiences and further spreading the misinformation about SRA and misinformation about how to interview children too. And people would write books like that as well and make money off of it. So it was a iffy time for books. Just be careful with anything that you read about any sort of Satanism stuff. There's even some that have been published even in the early 2000s too. So be cautious out there. Did the panic truly end? Some groups still believe that there's a credence to the allegations of SRA, and they still think it's real, and they still continue to discuss it, and they still continue to spread the misinformation. Far-right conspiracy theory movement known as QAnon. It originated on 4chan in 2017, and it's adopted many of the tropes of SRA and Satanic Panic. Instead of daycare centers being at the center, however, they put Hollywood actors, politicians, government officials as well, and they're saying that they're all Satanists and they're all performing Satanist, actions and rituals and so forth. I won't go into a ton of detail on this because it gets political. My point isn't to be political. My point is just misinformation, right? But grifters continue to work this angle, from people claiming that demons are possessing everyone, such as Warrens and the Outliers, to others being influenced by implanted memories and starting new spiritual movements, such as Teal Swan, whose therapist implanted SRA memories in her head. And now with the state of her, if you want to Google her a little bit, that's an interesting story too. It's still a problem today. It's just quieter and less common that people that are in positions of power are able to utilize this as an excuse. We're seeing less bad court cases and so forth, but the stuff is still out there and it's still happening. All we can do to help the victims of these grifters now is to keep spreading the truth, and hopefully one day the clouds will clear and they'll see what's really going on and how they're being manipulated. The Satanic Panic of the 80s was a dark chapter in American history, fueled by fear, paranoia, and misinformation. It's a sobering reminder of the importance of critical thinking, media literacy, and the need to approach sensational claims with a healthy dose of skepticism. In today's world of 24-hour social media opinions being flown around all over, on top of remaining vigilant in critical thinking, we all must watch out for grifters that do come out of the woodwork to profit on people who are scared and confused. Pretty much, stay vigilant out there, folks, is the main gist of everything. But thank you guys for checking out today's episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Satanic Panic and your thoughts on everything that we talked about today. So go ahead and leave your comments below. As well, if you're new here and this is the first video you're checking out, if you like and subscribe, even returning people, if you like the video, it also helps the algorithm so we can kind of grow the channel some more. Also, I'd like to thank our members and Patreon supporters. And I'm going to link, I talked about a few of my videos here, so I'll link some videos at the end here, but I'll put up cards throughout all the video. You guys have probably seen them popping up. This stuff does relate back into the Warrens, and it relates back into psychics too. Don't worry about what to watch next because I have linked a video, or if you want to sit and watch things for a little bit longer, a whole playlist on the side here. Go ahead and click those now to keep watching.